"You're going to love what we planned for you, Evelyn," my daughter-in-law said with a smile so bright it almost hurt to look at. Everyone in the dining room clapped when I walked in. Balloons floated near the ceiling. A gold banner stretched across the fireplace that read "Family Forever" in glittering letters. Vanessa hurried toward me holding a glass of champagne while my son Michael stood behind her with one hand in his pocket, smiling too quickly, too stiffly, like someone rehearsing happiness instead of feeling it. I remember thinking the whole thing felt strangely polished, as if every candle had been placed with exact precision. Vanessa hugged me tightly and whispered, "Tonight is all about you." But somehow, those words made my stomach tighten instead of warming my heart. The house smelled like roasted garlic and cinnamon candles, the same expensive candles Vanessa only lit when guests came over. Music played softly through hidden speakers. My grandchildren ran past me laughing, though even their laughter sounded oddly distant. Everyone kept telling me to sit down, relax, enjoy myself, but every time I stood up to help or walk into another room, Vanessa appeared beside me almost instantly. "No, no, Evelyn," she'd say sweetly, touching my arm. "You're the guest of honor tonight. Guest of honor. In my own family." I tried to ignore the feeling crawling under my skin. At 69, you learn how to silence uncomfortable instincts. You tell yourself you're overthinking. You tell yourself younger people simply do things differently now. But then I noticed something small. Tiny, really. The hallway table near the staircase usually held framed family photographs, school portraits, Christmas cards, vacation snapshots, pictures I had spent years collecting and protecting. But that night, every single photograph with me in it was gone. Not moved. Not rearranged. Gone. I stood there staring at the empty spaces on the table while laughter echoed from the dining room behind me. The polished wood showed pale outlines where the frames used to sit, like shadows of a life that had been quietly erased. I heard Vanessa's voice drift from the kitchen. "Did anyone make sure? The upstairs door stays locked." My chest tightened. Locked? Before I could think further, Michael suddenly appeared beside me holding a plate of cake. "Mom," he said too quickly, "everyone's waiting for you." His eyes wouldn't meet mine. That was when I realized something far worse than hurt feelings was happening inside that house. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 69 years old, born and raised in Hartford, Connecticut, and until that night, I truly believed I still knew the people I called family. I carried the plate of cake back to the dining room and smiled when people looked at me, but my hands felt strangely cold. Vanessa moved through the crowd like a woman hosting a charity gala instead of a family dinner. She laughed loudly, touched shoulders lightly, refilled wine glasses before anyone asked. Everyone seemed impressed by her kindness. That was the thing about Vanessa. She never acted cruel in ways people could easily point to. Her cruelty lived in details. Tiny omissions. Rearranged memories. Smiles that lasted half a second too long. I sat at the head of the table while my grandchildren argued softly over extra frosting. Michael cut slices of cake without once looking directly at me. Every now and then his eyes flickered toward Vanessa as if checking whether he was doing something correctly. The room felt warm from the oven and crowded bodies, but I could not shake the chill crawling through me. I glanced toward the staircase again. The upstairs hallway remained dark. Closed off. Untouched. Vanessa noticed my eyes immediately. "Evelyn," she said brightly, "you promised tonight was about relaxing. No wandering." The guests laughed politely. I forced a smile. "Old habits," I replied quietly. She squeezed my shoulder a little too firmly before returning to the kitchen. A few minutes later, my granddaughter Sophie leaned toward me while swinging her legs beneath the chair. "Mom says your house is going to look different soon," she whispered innocently. Michael nearly dropped the serving knife. "Sophie," he snapped sharply enough to silence the table. Vanessa recovered first. She laughed softly and brushed a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. Children hear one little conversation and turn it into something dramatic. But nobody else laughed after that. I noticed Grace Holloway standing near the dining room archway watching me carefully. Grace had been my neighbor for almost 20 years. Widowed like me. Sharp-eyed. Impossible to fool. She slowly walked over and leaned close enough that only I could hear her. Evelyn, she murmured, I drove past your house earlier tonight. Something in her voice made my heartbeat slow instead of speed up. The way people sound right before delivering bad news. There was a moving truck outside. I stared at her without blinking. What? She hesitated. I thought maybe you hired help. But they were carrying boxes out through the garage. The room suddenly sounded far away. Forks against china. Ice clinking inside glasses. Vanessa laughing near the kitchen island. I set my fork down carefully beside my untouched cake. Then I reached into my purse for my house keys. My fingers touched lipstick. Tissues. My reading glasses. But the keys were gone. I checked my purse again slowly, carefully, even though I already knew the truth. The keys were not there. My fingertips moved through every pocket twice while the conversations around me blurred together into meaningless noise. I looked up across the dining room and found Vanessa watching me from beside the kitchen counter. She smiled the moment our eyes met. Calm. Polite. Controlled. Then she raised her wine glass slightly as if we shared some private joke. That was the moment something settled heavily inside my chest. Not panic. Not confusion. Recognition. I had seen that expression before over the years, usually after smaller things disappeared from my life. First it was my seat at Thanksgiving dinner, moved quietly toward the end of the table because the kids needed more room. Then family vacations I somehow learned about from photographs online. Then recipes my mother taught me suddenly becoming Vanessa's holiday traditions. Piece by piece, she had been editing me out of the family so gradually I almost convinced myself it was accidental. Grace touched my arm gently. Do you want me to drive you home? She whispered. Before I could answer, Vanessa appeared beside us carrying a fresh tray of coffee cups. Everything all right over here? She asked sweetly. Grace held her gaze a second too long. Evelyn cannot find her keys. Vanessa pressed one hand dramatically against her chest. Oh no. Maybe they slipped out upstairs when you first arrived. Upstairs. The locked hallway. Michael suddenly stepped between us. I will help look later, he said quickly. Let us not ruin the evening over misplaced keys. Ruin the evening. I stared at my son while he avoided my eyes again. When Michael was 10 years old, he used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms because he believed mothers could stop bad things from happening. I remembered how tightly he held my hand back then. How fiercely protective he once was. Now he looked at me like a problem he hoped would stay quiet long enough to disappear on its own. Vanessa placed a cup of coffee in front of me. You should sit and relax, she said softly. Tonight is meant to celebrate family. I wrapped both hands around the warm mug without drinking. Across the room, I noticed one of the closet doors near the staircase was slightly open. Inside sat 3 large plastic storage bins with thick black lids. Bright orange stickers stretched across the front of each one. Storage Unit B. My stomach dropped so suddenly I thought I might faint. One of the bins had my late husband Richard's handwriting on the side in faded black marker. Christmas decorations. I kept my eyes on the storage bins while the rest of the family continued eating dessert behind me. Nobody noticed the small shift in my breathing except Grace. She followed my gaze toward the closet and her expression changed instantly. Not surprise. Confirmation. That frightened me more than anything else. It meant she already suspected what was happening. Vanessa suddenly stepped between me and the hallway, smooth as a curtain closing. Michael, she called cheerfully, why do not you show your mother the backyard renovations after dinner? She was redirecting me. Keeping me moving. Keeping me distracted. I smiled faintly and lifted the coffee cup to my lips even though the drink had gone cold. Actually, I said quietly, I think I need some air first. Vanessa's smile tightened for half a second. Barely noticeable unless you were looking for cracks. Of course, she replied. Just stay downstairs. The cleaning crew left supplies all over the second floor earlier. Cleaning crew. At 9 o'clock at night during a family party. I nodded as though I believed her. Then I walked slowly toward the powder room near the staircase while conversations resumed behind me. My heels clicked softly against the hardwood floor. The closer I moved toward the hallway, the quieter the dining room sounded. I passed the half-open closet again, and this time noticed more than storage bins. There were framed paintings wrapped in moving blankets. My paintings. A brass lamp Richard bought me during our anniversary trip to Vermont 23 years ago. Even the blue ceramic umbrella stand from my front hallway stood tucked beside the boxes like an object already claimed by someone else. My throat tightened painfully. They were not cleaning my house. They were dismantling it. I reached the powder room, but instead of entering, I quietly slipped farther down the dark hallway. The house smelled different away from the party. Dust. Cardboard. Packing tape. Somewhere upstairs, I heard muffled footsteps overhead followed by a low male voice. Movers. Working while guests drank wine downstairs, pretending this was a celebration. I placed one hand against the wall to steady myself. Every instinct told me to confront them immediately. To demand answers from my son. To walk upstairs and open every locked door. But another voice inside me, colder and calmer, whispered something else. Watch first. Understand everything before you speak. That voice had carried me through Richard's cancer treatments. Through hospital waiting rooms and sleepless nights. Through grief. I trusted it now. As I turned back toward the dining room, I heard Vanessa laugh loudly again, bright and polished like silverware clinking against china. Then I heard her say words that stopped me completely. By next month, she whispered to someone nearby, all of this will finally be settled. I returned to the dining room carrying myself the same way I always had. Shoulders straight. Calm expression. Measured steps. Years ago, Richard once told me that dignity was not something people gave you. It was something you protected quietly when others tried to take it away. I understood those words differently now. Vanessa looked relieved when she saw me sit back down at the table. Michael immediately poured more wine into my glass, even though I had barely touched the first one. His hands trembled slightly. He knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. I watched him carefully while everyone resumed talking about school schedules and summer travel plans. My son had inherited Richard's eyes. Kind eyes once. Honest eyes. But guilt changes the shape of a person's face. That night, Michael looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with work. Vanessa reached for his hand several times during dinner, almost like she was keeping him anchored to a decision he no longer felt comfortable making. Sophie leaned against my shoulder while coloring on a paper placemat. Mom says you might live somewhere with nurses, she whispered absent-mindedly without looking up. The crayon stopped moving in my granddaughter's hand when the silence around the table suddenly thickened. Vanessa laughed softly again, but this time the sound cracked around the edges. Sweetheart, she said carefully, Grandma Evelyn is getting older, and we all want what is best for her. Older. I almost smiled at the simplicity of it. One word. That was all it took for people to begin speaking around you instead of to you. To move your belongings. To discuss your future over dessert while pretending it was concern instead of convenience. I folded my napkin carefully onto the table. Interesting, I said quietly. Michael finally looked at me directly then. Fear flashed across his face so quickly most people would have missed it. But I did not. Across the room, Grace stood near the fireplace pretending to study family photographs that no longer included me. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. Do not react yet. Vanessa rose from her chair carrying fresh coffee toward the guests in the living room. The moment she disappeared around the corner, Michael leaned closer to me. His voice dropped low enough that only I could hear. Mom, he said, rubbing his hands together nervously, things have just gotten difficult lately. Vanessa is trying to help organize everything before it becomes too stressful. Organize everything. Such gentle language for stripping a person's life apart one box at a time. I stared at my son for several seconds before answering. Did you remove Richard's belongings from my house today? Michael's face went completely still. He opened his mouth once, closed it, then looked toward the living room where Vanessa's laughter floated back through the house like music from another world. Michael never answered my question. He just sat there staring at the tablecloth while voices drifted through the living room and silverware clinked softly against dessert plates. That silence told me more than words could have. A son who believed his actions were right would have defended them immediately. Michael looked like a man waiting for forgiveness he had not earned yet. I leaned back slowly in my chair and studied him carefully. There were new lines around his mouth I had not noticed before. Stress lines. Fear lines. Vanessa always said she handled everything because Michael hated conflict. But suddenly I wondered if that had been the plan all along. Keep him overwhelmed. Keep him dependent. Keep him too exhausted to question where her decisions were leading. Mom, he finally whispered, we were trying to make things easier for you. Easier. Another soft word. Another polished excuse. I glanced toward the hallway where the storage bin sat hidden behind a half-open door like evidence no one expected me to notice. By removing my belongings while inviting me to dinner? I asked quietly. Michael rubbed his forehead hard enough to redden the skin. Vanessa found a beautiful retirement community outside Stamford, he said carefully. Private gardens. Medical staff nearby. Activities. Other people your age. My age. I almost laughed at how quickly people turn aging into a reason to erase someone's choices. Richard and I built our home 38 years ago. Every room carried traces of our life together. Pencil marks inside the pantry where we measured Michael's height as a child. The oak tree Richard planted the summer before he got sick. The blue kitchen tiles I saved for almost 2 years to afford. They were not discussing a house. They were discussing my memories as though they were furniture to be relocated. Vanessa returned carrying a tray of fresh pastries from the kitchen. Everything all right? She asked brightly, though her eyes moved quickly between Michael and me. Perfectly fine, I answered before Michael could speak. I even smiled at her. That seemed to confuse her more than anger would have. She sat beside my son and rested one manicured hand gently on his arm. Possessive. Protective. Controlling. Evelyn, she said softly, we all love you very much. This is simply about making sure you are cared for properly. I looked directly at her then. Really looked at her. Vanessa wore kindness the same way some people wear expensive perfume. Thick enough to hide something unpleasant underneath. How thoughtful of you, I replied calmly. For a brief second, uncertainty flickered across her face. She expected tears. Shock. Maybe even gratitude. Instead, I picked up my coffee cup with steady hands and took a slow sip while my mind quietly began putting every missing piece together. The rest of the evening passed like a performance where everyone already knew their lines except me. Vanessa moved gracefully from guest to guest collecting empty plates while soft jazz played through the speakers. Michael barely spoke at all. Every time I looked at him, he looked away first. I realized then that guilt has a physical weight to it. You could see it pulling his shoulders downward across the dinner table. Around 10:30, the guests began leaving one by one. Coats disappeared from hooks near the entryway. Half-finished wine glasses sat abandoned beside folded napkins. Vanessa hugged everyone tightly at the door while thanking them for coming to celebrate family. I remained seated near the fireplace watching the evening slowly collapse into silence. Grace stayed. Of course she stayed. She always knew when leaving would be dangerous. Vanessa approached me carrying my coat draped carefully over her arm. We found your keys, she announced brightly. They somehow slipped behind the buffet table. She placed them into my hand with a smile polished enough for a magazine advertisement. But the second my fingers closed around the keys, I noticed something immediately. The small silver house key was missing from the ring. Only the car key and mailbox key remained. I lifted my eyes toward Vanessa slowly. That is strange, I said quietly. She tilted her head with practiced innocence. Oh. I held up the ring gently between 2 fingers. My front door key is gone. For the first time all night, Vanessa did not answer immediately. Michael froze beside the staircase. Silence spread through the room so quickly it almost felt visible. Then Vanessa laughed softly. I am sure it will turn up at your house, she said. You know how easy it is to misplace things. Misplace things. Like family photographs. Like Christmas decorations. Like a woman's entire life. I slipped the keys into my purse without another word. That seemed to unsettle her even more. She wanted emotion from me because emotional people are easier to control. Angry people make mistakes. Hurt people explain themselves. But silence forces guilty people to keep talking. Grace offered to drive behind me back to my house, just in case. Vanessa insisted that was unnecessary, though she smiled while saying it. Outside, the night air felt cold against my skin. The neighborhood stood perfectly still beneath rows of porch lights and trimmed hedges. Michael followed me onto the driveway while Vanessa stayed near the front door watching us from inside the warm yellow light of the house. "Mom," he whispered once we were alone, "please try to understand." I looked at my son for a long moment before answering. "No, Michael," I said softly. "I think tonight is the first time I finally do." Then I opened my car door and drove home to see what remained of my life. The first thing I noticed when I pulled into my driveway was the porch light. I always left it on when I went out at night, but now it was dark. My house sat silent beneath the Connecticut cold, like something waiting for me to discover it. Grace parked behind my car but did not get out immediately. She watched my face through the windshield as though preparing herself for whatever we were about to find. I stepped onto the porch and instinctively reached for my missing front door key before remembering it was gone. For a moment, I simply stood there staring at the brass doorknob Richard installed himself 20 years ago after insisting the old one felt cheap. Strange how grief can live inside ordinary objects. Grace finally joined me and touched my elbow gently. "Try the garage keypad," she whispered. My hands trembled slightly entering the code. The garage door lifted halfway before stopping abruptly with a grinding sound. Several large moving boxes blocked the sensor from inside. My heartbeat slowed instead of quickened. Calm had begun replacing shock now. Cold calm. Dangerous calm. We squeezed through the narrow opening and stepped into the garage. 3 walls of my life stared back at me in cardboard form. Boxes stacked shoulder high. Dining room china wrapped in newspaper. Winter coats sealed inside clear plastic containers. Richard's woodworking tools lined carefully beside folding chairs like inventory inside a warehouse. Bright orange labels marked everything with neat black handwriting. Keep. Donate. Storage. I walked slowly through the garage without speaking. Grace covered her mouth with one hand when she noticed my wedding portrait leaning against the far wall beside gardening supplies. The glass frame had been wrapped in moving paper as if someone planned to transport it permanently. Then I saw the final insult. My name written across multiple labels in Vanessa's handwriting. Evelyn bedroom. Evelyn books. Evelyn personal items. Not mom. Not grandma. Just Evelyn. Like I was already becoming a former resident instead of family. I opened one box carefully and found framed photographs removed from my living room shelves earlier that evening. Another contained Richard's sweaters folded with painful precision. The blue cashmere one he wore during our last anniversary dinner still carried traces of his cologne. That finally broke something inside me. Not loudly. Not dramatically. I simply sat down on a storage bin in the middle of my own garage and stared at the boxes while silence pressed against my chest. Grace crouched beside me quietly. "Evelyn," she whispered carefully, "this did not happen tonight alone." I nodded slowly because now I understood that too. This had been planned for months. Maybe longer. Every missing photograph. Every conversation about aging. Every suggestion that I needed help. It was not concern. It was preparation. Then Grace noticed a white folder resting on top of one sealed box near the workbench. Across the front, typed neatly in black ink, were 4 words that made my blood run cold. House Transition Master Plan. I carried the white folder into the kitchen and placed it carefully on the table Richard built the year Michael left for college. The house felt unfamiliar now, not because things were missing, but because I suddenly understood what had been happening inside it while I still believed I was safe. Grace sat across from me silently as I opened the folder. The first page was a printed timeline. Week by week. Step by step. Remove excess furniture. Move sentimental items to storage. Consult assisted living advisor. Prepare home for transition. Every sentence was written in cold business language, as though my entire life could be reduced to a project checklist. Halfway down the page, I saw my own name followed by words that made my chest tighten. Resistance expected initially. Michael's signature appeared beside several notes in blue ink. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not because I was shocked anymore. Shock had already passed. This felt quieter than shock. Like mourning someone still alive. Grace slowly turned another page. Financial estimates. Realtor consultations. Suggested renovations to increase resale value. Then we both froze at the same line near the bottom. Assess cognitive decline narrative with physician support if necessary. I stared at those words for a very long time. Vanessa had not only planned to move me, she had planned to make people believe I could no longer make decisions for myself. Suddenly, every conversation from the past year rearranged itself in my mind. Vanessa correcting me publicly when I forgot tiny details. Michael asking whether I still felt comfortable driving at night. The repeated suggestions that I seemed tired lately. They had been building a story around me slowly, carefully, until one day everyone would accept it as truth. Grace reached across the table and covered my hand gently. "Evelyn," she whispered, "you need a lawyer immediately." I nodded once. Then I stood up and walked toward the hallway closet where Richard kept our important documents. My hands moved calmly now. Clear-minded. Focused. Inside the lockbox beneath old insurance papers sat the one detail Vanessa never knew existed. The house had never been transferred into Michael's name after Richard died. Years earlier, during Richard's illness, our attorney advised placing the property into a protected family trust under my sole authority. Michael would inherit only after my death unless I chose otherwise. Vanessa had spent months planning to remove me from a home she did not legally control. For the first time that night, I smiled. Not because I felt victorious. Because I finally understood something important. They believed age made me powerless. Fragile. Easy to guide quietly into the background. But they forgot who built this family long before Vanessa ever entered it. They forgot who paid the mortgage during Michael's hardest years. They forgot who survived burying the love of her life and still kept standing afterward. I closed the lockbox carefully and picked up my phone. At 11:43 that night, while Vanessa probably believed her plan was almost complete, I called my attorney and said 5 calm words that changed everything. "We need to protect my house.